A four-time Emmy Award-winning sportscaster turned political and cultural commentator.
Was a highly recognizable reporter for NBC Sports.
Reporter, journalist with decades of experience. Host of the Sidelines.
Michele Tafoya.
Michele Tafoya.
Welcome, everyone. Michele Tafoya.
I knew if I wanted to say the things that really mattered, I would have to leave the show.
Michele Tafoya has decided to step away.
Baby, cut yourself. Baby, cut yourself.
She's retired from sports and she's talking politics.
So now I'm going to channel my energy towards the hard stuff. It was a massive wake-up call.
You had real skin in the game to do what you're doing.
For all those people who feel like they can't have a voice in this, I want to speak for them.
You're a courage warrior and we need more of you, and you're absolutely making a difference.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because it sure is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Michele Tafoya is a four-time Emmy Award-winning sportscaster turned political and cultural commentator. Her first four sports Emmys are a record, as her work was displayed on Sunday Night Football while the show was ranked as the #1 program in primetime television. She called her last of 5 Super Bowls on February 13th, 2022, and retired from sportscasting the next day. Talk about going out on top. In total, Michele covered 327 games, the most primetime TV games for an NFL sideline reporter. At the time, people called her crazy for leaving one of the most coveted roles in TV, but in her words, she couldn't ignore that little voice anymore after all the country had endured in recent years. But thankfully for us, for our country, she didn't walk away from the media. In fact, and to no surprise, Michele has become one of the leading voices in our culture. Today, she hosts the Michele Tafoya podcast and makes appearances on television and talk shows to discuss the state of American politics and culture. My personal favorites are her appearances on Fox News and Gutfeld. But today, we are blessed to have her spend some time with We the People. Michele, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, that's nice, Gates. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we're going to cover all the important stuff, but I want to have a little bit of fun. So I'm going to sprinkle some of that in and out of the questions. First, I want to know the weirdest, most awkward live television interview you've ever had. I mean, one that you almost barely survived.
Well, I would say it was at an NBA game when we were going to interview Dwayne Wade's then wife, his first wife, and she stood up to do the interview as we came on camera, and we didn't realize how scantily clad she was and how pregnant she was, which meant that she was bustier than usual. So I think I asked one question and we got out of that quick. That's one that I remember. When you said awkward, barely got through, I think that's the one.
Okay, I like that. So you've said that there were costs to sort of stepping away from, call it the mainstream media at the peak of your career. I think you recognized a vibe shift long before the rest of the country did. That's sort of a played out term now, but we're going back a few years. You were sort of a pioneer. You mentioned that you couldn't ignore that little voice in your head. So I'm curious, Michele, was there a singular moment that brought you to this, or was it sort of an evolution of things over time?
Well, I would say the biggest turning point was 9/11. I remember it like we all do, exactly where I was sitting in my house, what I was doing, and what the next several hours were like. And it was a massive wake-up call for me. It renewed my love and fierce defense of this country and our Constitution. It made me, I hadn't been married that long when this happened, and I knew kids were hopefully going to be in our future. And I just couldn't believe this happened. So that was a wake up. And after that, I really started listening and paying attention so much more than I ever had. I was raised patriotic. My dad was the son of immigrants who came here legally and, grew up dirt poor. My mom grew up dirt poor. But they made the most of their lives. They lived the American dream and they passed it down to us. And I've never, ever forgotten that or forsaken that or thought that it couldn't happen for anyone. And so this threat to us from the outside then became a threat from the inside because I saw us splitting apart. And it was painful to watch. And I felt like just over time, and particularly covering the NFL, every game you are seeing, whether they be military guys who bring out the flag for the anthem or wounded warriors who come out and get their experience on the sideline. And I thought, those are the real heroes we need to be focused on. I know that Brett Favre's on the field. I know that Tom Brady's over there. I know that Peyton Manning's about to, set another record. But these are the guys who give us the chance. And so I think my values just really started to shift. And I actually gave my notice to Sunday Night Football far before I ended up leaving. We just continued to work back and forth. Well, could you stay and do the Olympics? Could you just get us through this one more Super Bowl? And so I stayed on longer than I had initially intended to. Zero regrets. But when you sign up for that, as you mentioned, #1 show in primetime, you can't just go on what was then Twitter and say all you want to say, because then you invite controversy to the show. And that's not being part of a team. And I knew that. It's what I signed up for. I accepted that. So I knew if I wanted to say the things and do the things that really mattered, I would have to leave the show. And that's what I did.
Yeah, and your courage is admirable, and that's sort of what we celebrate on this show. So you went from a world that, at least it used to be this way, or most of the time it's a place where we all get along, sports. You can watch football and basketball with your buddies, and politics used to not come up. But you've now shifted into the total opposite realm where your political values are put in the public sphere purposefully. And so I'm curious as to how this phase of your career feels versus the previous one. I would look at the previous one maybe as fun and this one as fulfilling, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I'd love to hear you sort of talk about that.
Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football and the Olympics were the best years of my career. It was phenomenal. I working with the best of the best. Al Michaels and John Madden, then Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth, our producer Fred Godelli, our director Drew Esikoff. They're all in the Hall of Fame. They're all in the Sports Broadcasters Hall of Fame, every single one of them. And it made you raise your game. So I worked exceedingly hard. It was incredible. And along the way, knowing this was coming, I knew people would think I was nuts, but I didn't care. Because one thing, I think you talk about this evolution of how this happened. I think it was during COVID when I would post something on Facebook about, well, there's this alternative medication, or someone said this, and the blowback I would get. And I thought, well, I can handle that. But then other friends of mine were telling me, I wish I could repost what you posted, but my employer would hate it, or my best friends would, just freak out. And I thought to myself, what is going on? How is it that we can't just have differences of opinion and that be okay? Why are we ripping at each other? And I thought, for all those people who feel like they can't have a voice in this, I want to speak for them. I've got nothing to lose. My husband and I discussed it thoroughly, what it meant financially for us, what it might mean for his business, all of those things. And I can't, I got to do this. There are too many people out there who either they need the encouragement, we need to build this sort of, I call it the coalition of courage, or I'm just going to do it for them. And so it just became really something I wanted to do. Listen, I don't think that highly of myself that I can make a difference, but if I can be there to encourage people to speak out and do what the First Amendment tells us we can do, I want to be that person.
Well, you're humble because you are making a difference. I mean, long before I had the thought of this show in my head, your name had already come up in a number of conversations with me and my friends about people that are putting their very public platforms at risk to promote their values. I mean, I say this show is about celebrating faith, family, and freedom. You can find other shows that do that, but what I try to do that's unique to this show is actually promote people that have already done it and are still doing it and had something to risk. I mean, you had real skin in the game to do what you're doing. So you're a courage warrior, and we need more of you, and you're absolutely making a difference. All right, another fun one. the best sports moment you've ever seen in person.
Oh, gosh, I have been so lucky to see so many. I mean, truly.
Is there a favorite?
I think it would have to be the Rio Olympic Games. It was Michael Phelps' last Olympics, and the entire U.S. team. So this, I'm using this because I saw it day after day after day. Americans kicking butt in the pool, and I can distinctly remember leaving the pool one night and saying, I can't believe I'm paid to do this. This is the most fun I've ever had. And the beauty of covering the Olympics for NBC was that it's okay to be a homer when you're covering it for the American audience. It's okay to sort of, just cheer along with the person who's winning. That doesn't mean you're anti anyone else. It simply means that when Michael Phelps wins and gets gold, you get to talk to him in a way that is celebratory and fun. And it was Katie Ledecky, it was Michael Phelps, it was the relay teams, so many swimmers, and some who weren't necessarily favored and ended up winning. And it was just, it was goosebumps every single night. And so I think, look, you mentioned the 5 Super Bowls, and those were all phenomenal, but I just think that stretch in the pool was awesome.
Yeah, I expect you to go football with all the games you've covered.
I know.
My favorite sports moment was being in attendance for my Bucks to win the Super Bowl in our home city, first team to ever do it a few years ago. So that was pretty cool. That still gives me goosebumps. I want to sort of transition to your faith and the role that faith plays in shaping your values, because I listen to your show, I watch your podcast, and your most recent episode talked a lot about faith. And you were in an industry where not only was it not popular to promote your faith, but it almost wasn't allowed. It certainly wasn't encouraged. And now you have platforms like the Michele Tafoya podcast, like Fox News, where you can openly talk about these things. So in the career you came from, how did you stay grounded in your faith?
Well, first of all, I want to mention a moment. Damar Hamlin, remember when he collapsed on the field and everyone was just holding their breath? And the word praying for him, prayers, let's pray, came up again and again and again on ESPN and other outlets. We're just praying for Damar. And I thought that was awesome. I'm not, how do I describe my faith? It's still evolving. I was raised Catholic. I ended up leaving the Catholic Church when I became a little disturbed by a few things. Ended up moving to an Episcopal church where I got married, even though my husband was Lutheran, and we've baptized our children Lutheran. So we're kind of all over the map. What I can tell you is I'm a Christian, and I can tell you that I'm growing my faith right now. I think as you get older, you start to see that the world is far bigger than you. And, you become less self-centered. You realize there's something bigger out there. And for me right now, the big picture thing is saving this country from itself, trying to remember that the sacrifices that were made, the ideas that made this country great, and how people are trying to tear us from within. But I also understand that there's something even bigger than that. So I'm still growing in my faith journey, if you want to call it that. I know that sounds kind of goofy, but every now and then I like to have a guest on who challenges me or informs me or tells me what makes them faithful. And I've had quite a few, and it's really nice. And so that's all I can tell you about faith. I do pray a lot. I believe in the power of prayer. And I know that having seen both my parents leave this earth, that they are in a better place. And so that's kind of where I am right now. I don't think it was ever challenged covering the NFL necessarily. Listen, what you don't see necessarily in the NFL are after the game is over, the whistle blows, the clock ticks down to 0. There is a large contingent of players that get together in a prayer circle after the games. A large and growing contingent, and superstars and no names alike. And oftentimes I'm waiting to do a post-game interview, and it's like, well, he's still in the prayer circle. Yeah, but we got to get off the air, get him out of the prayer. So it's there. There are a lot of players who have a deep faith, and so don't think it's not there. It's just not chic or sexy to show it on television.
Yeah, and the Damar Hamlin whole sort of situation, it's similar to other situations where we believe things behind closed doors. We're not always comfortable talking about them, but when something happens, specifically tragedy, it just comes out. I mean, it's people show their natural tendencies, and it was very refreshing for people you wouldn't expect to hear talking about prayer, openly promoting, we need to pray for him. We need to pray for him. It was beautiful. And, what I hear from you is honesty and openness. And I'm a Catholic, but I walk my faith every day trying to get closer and closer. And some days it's one step forward and 4 steps back. So, I mean, we're never complete on our journey until God calls us home. And I was going to ask you what role you think faith should play in the public and national conversation, but I think you covered that. So I'm going to ask a little bit different question. What do you think is the one topic that we need to promote more in the national conversation? If you could wave a wand and say for one day the national media is going to talk about this one thing and it's going to help our country heal, what do you think it is?
There are so many, but the first one that came to my mind was the family, the nuclear family. I mean, here's the thing about science that's really interesting. Males, biological males, impregnate females, one way or the other.
Are we breaking news, Michelle?
I don't think we're breaking news, but I think people tend to forget that it's nature. And then you've got one of my favorite people on the planet, like Tony Dungy, the Hall of Fame coach, who is out there trying to promote that fathers stay in marriages, stay at home with their children. The breakup of the family, I think, has been devastating to America. And sadly, I think it's by design. I don't just think that people, that people just leave. Now, look, we accept divorce. It's become something that's sort of normal now. And I had an interesting interview with a guy named Adam B. Coleman, who's a writer, and talked about the fact that he didn't have his father in his life and what that did to him. It was a really interesting conversation. Look, I adopted my daughter. We had a son, and then we adopted our daughter. And there have been discussions about, does she want to meet her biological parents? All of that. That's a work in progress. There are some people who truly believe that until you do meet the people that created you, you might have some sort of hole in your heart. I don't know. And that hole can't always be fixed by meeting these people, because sometimes you romanticize it and then it turns out to be not good at all. So that'll be up to my daughter. But, I do think we have a lot of forces right now pulling the family apart. And we got to acknowledge it. And we can't just say, oh, it's good for the kids. We're thinking of the kids. No, you're not. Parents need to have charge of their kids. And are there some rare circumstances where the parents are endangering their kids? Yes, there are. But those are the rarities. And we as a country know how to deal with it. I think we can do it better. I think we can do it a lot better. But I just think that that the family is so critically important to a kid's upbringing and how they develop. And we're not doing a bang-up job with it right now.
We're going to talk about family in a moment. Culture starts at the kitchen table, and we've got to do a better job of promoting a familial culture. I'm a fan of our president, but I was on 3 radio shows this morning talking about the policy that he's trying to implement to give families $5,000 for every additional child that they're willing to have. you can't buy your way out of situations. Subsidies like that have been tried in many countries and they have never fixed the problem. We have to change the culture. I listened to your episode with Adam B. Coleman. He's a model for XXXY clothing. We've had Jen Say on the show. We're very intimately familiar with that story. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody that's listening to this episode, along with all your other episodes.
Thank you, Gates. I appreciate that.
So in regards to your podcast, I'm curious I'm a newer show and I've learned so much about myself, about the audience since I've started this show. For me, my question is going to be for you. What has surprised you about yourself or your audience since you started the show? And I'll give my answer first. I've been so vulnerable in these episodes. My friends watch them and they're like, "Hey man, you don't talk like that when we're having a beer and watching the game." And it's just something about creating an environment of vulnerability and open conversation has been a huge surprise for me. And I've been way more comfortable than I thought I would have been. I think we get lost in this sort of culture of toxic masculinity. I think it's masculine to be vulnerable. I think it's masculine to be open. So that's what surprised me about myself and some guests. But what would you say with your show?
Surprising. Well, it's surprised me how much work this requires.
Yeah.
I'm no stranger to hard work. I've been employed since I was like 10 years old, doing something or another. I don't know if anything necessarily has surprised me. I think if anything, it would be this, that there are fascinating people in America and throughout the world that you've never heard of. And I've thought about changing the name of my podcast to Amplified because I like to amplify these voices that many people haven't heard of. You know, they're not getting their platforms on mainstream, whatever. And I find them online. I find them on X. I find them on Instagram. And I follow them and I look at them and I listen to them and I go, damn, that's a really interesting point of view. Let's bring that person on. And before I know it, I'm fascinated and curious and amazed by how many cool people there are in the world. And I like to bring their voices forward because I just think it's good for all of us to know that we don't just have to listen to the usual suspects to get an education about who we are, what we stand for, what our values are, where we're going, all those things. So I think that's been a beautiful surprise.
Yeah, part of the new media landscape. We are the media now. We can sort of curate, the stories and the audiences that we want to appeal to, and it's opened up an avenue for many people that didn't have a place to tell their story to do that. So that's cool to hear. All right, so if you could ban one cliche sports interview question that everybody seems to ask, what would it be?
Well, initially you just want to go, oh, how does it feel? But I think most people have censored that one out on their own. I guess it would start with, and I've been guilty of every bad question throughout my 30 years doing it. So trust me, I'm not saying holier than thou here, but how important is fill in the blank? Because that really only leaves the coach or player to say, well, it's really important, or, well, it's really not that important. And really it takes time and practice to figure out the best way to ask questions in a sports thing. But that one's kind of cliche. I think also, assuming that everyone thinks there was one great moment, and I'm going to space on names and places, but it was a college football coach who had won a game to advance to the national championship. He happened to be African American, and the reporter, she had no choice. She had to ask him, you are the first African American coach to make it to a national title game. And the audience started to clap when she asked the question because this interview was piped into the stadium. And he kind of said, yeah, but there are great coaches of all ethnicities and colors, and I don't want to make it about that. And I loved his answer. And so, it's all of that, the first, you're the first. Some of them are really important. Some of them not so much important. But I had to ask it once when Brett Favre was with the Minnesota Vikings and he faced Green Bay for the first time. He played against Aaron Rodgers. And after the game, I was in that just lucky position to interview him. And I said, you've just become the first quarterback in NFL history to beat all 32 teams. And he said, well, I guess you got to be remembered for something. And that was purebred, and it was beautiful. And, but, it's sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes not so much.
Yeah. So how is it that, no, I'm kidding.
How important is it?
So I want to talk more about family now. So you grew up in a 2-parent home. You have 3 siblings. You're now married, mother of 2, 3 if we include the dog Jersey.
And he requires more maintenance than anybody.
Who doesn't include their dog? So your work is displayed in the most public form possible. Anybody can consume it at their fingertips. How does being a mother shape the way you execute in your career?
Lately, I've been trying to cut back on my swearing because my amazing daughter has never sworn in her life. Never.
Wow.
And she's 16. And she just inherently knows right from wrong, good from bad, good from evil. It's been innate in her since the minute we put her in our arms. So I'm trying to be a better person because I was in New York. I went to a Broadway show, intermission, down in the restroom with a bunch of these ladies. And these 2 young girls were like speaking at normal level, like you and I are talking right now, and just swearing. And I was like, that is really unbecoming. So I'm trying now, and sometimes I do it on my show. I'm trying to be better about it. It's allowed on the Gutfeld show because they can bleep it out after the fact. I think that I always take into account how will this reflect on them? How will they feel about their mom if they see this episode, or if they know I'm talking about this? I certainly, I'm just trying to raise my kids right at every turn. And I think that means different things for different parents. But my husband and I are very much a team in the way that we're raising them. And so now and then we remind them, what do you think Tyler would think of this? What do you think Olivia would think of this? And so that I think that they influence me constantly in the best of ways. So I that's the best answer I can give you right now.
Yeah. So the nuclear family is something that's very important to me, and you've already alluded to it. I think the nuclear family is the most important institution in society. I mean, every day starts and ends in the home. So we can start it well, we can end it well, and hopefully everything in between will somewhat take care of itself if we're doing an appropriate job of that. But that comes with responsibility. That comes with parents. And I think that we have begun to do a poor job of celebrating masculinity in society, celebrating the role of women in society. Men and women play different roles in society. And I think we need more men championing women. We're fighting that battle in athletics. We know that. And we need more more women celebrating masculinity.
I agree.
It's a team sport.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that and the role of men and women in society?
We are so different, men and women. I don't care how you identify, and you're free to identify as anything you want. But I certainly think you're right in that we don't celebrate men. I think it's starting to come back. I think that people realize it. I think Gen Say has done it with XXXY. I think there are other companies that are starting to realize it. I think discouraging boys from their instinctive, actions and reactions is harmful. It makes them second guess themselves all the time. There are productive ways to rein in both sexes. Like we can say toxic masculinity. Hey, I've seen some toxic femininity. I've seen some toxic trans. I've seen toxic humanity. So rather than making it a function of masculinity, there are toxic people in all walks of life. Why would you just aim it at the guys? That's sexist to me. And I thought we weren't supposed to be sexist. So the other part of it is that, I remember Hillary Clinton in her heyday talking about the war on women. we're in a bigger war on women right now with men competing against women in athletics.
Absolutely.
Like I said, you can identify however you'd like. But when you step into a swimming competition, as I think Riley Gaines recently posted about a masters swimming competition where a trans woman, meaning a biological male, won every single event that he entered. So first of all, women have to stand down. Don't compete. I know that's not sustainable, but it's a way to start. And it is a way to say, I'm going to step down from this podium, this swim stand, this diving board, whatever it is. I'm stepping off the court and I'm saying, no, I'm not going to compete against you because that's not fair. It's not right. You've displaced a woman on your team or in your lane or wherever, and you're going to displace a woman getting a scholarship opportunity or whatever that. We've talked about this ad nauseum, Gates. You know that. I know that. And so, but people have to really now start walking the walk. And it's been a shame to me that some public people won't do it because they're worried that it will affect their brand. And I think that's a little selfish, and I think it's unprincipled. And I don't think this is an 80-20 issue, by the way. I think it's like 95-5. I think most people, if they had a gun to their head, heaven forbid, and were asked, they would not die on this hill. They would say, no, it's unfair, it's wrong, it's stupid. It's just, we're in a weird moment in history, and we got to get out of it somehow.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough consequences. You mentioned asking the female athletes not to compete, which, that sucks for them, but we've got to figure out some consequences that these intruders will face. We have to take it away from them.
Well, yeah, we have to take it away. I mean, these bodies that are, whether it's the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, whether it's the NCAA, whatever it is, they have to say, no. Right. We divided sports into men's and women's divisions in the first place for a reason. And I don't care if you've been on puberty blockers. You still got a totally different set of, chromosomes. You don't experience a menstrual cycle. You don't have real you don't go through. It's just dumb. I mean, we could come after line after line after line. This is not homophobic. This is not transphobic. This is pro-woman. And this is, to say, keep women's sports for women. It's just not that, it's not that deep.
We had Riley Gaines on a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about the moment that she tied Will Thomas for fifth place. They only had one trophy and one space for someone to stand on the fifth place podium, and she was asked to stand on the sixth place podium and not receive the trophy because it wasn't good for photo optics. It's just like we're living in the Twilight Zone. All right, let's get out of the Twilight Zone and go back into the fun zone. So I'm from Tampa. You mentioned Tony Dungy. He's a pillar of our community. But unrelated to that, I've sat through many a Bucks games in September where it's 110 degrees outside. You're just melting into your seat. You actually have to pour water on your seat when you come back from the bathroom because it's so hot. So my question for you is, pick a sideline to report from. Week 1 in Tampa or Week 18 in Buffalo?
Oh, that's cruel. That's cruel. Well, at least Week 18 in Buffalo, I can have hand warmers, I can have the gear. But I've done one of the coldest games in NFL history. It happened to be in Minnesota, and it was not in a dome, and it was brutal. It was brutal, but I survived. Really, with the heat, that's difficult. That's really, if you're talking, triple digits, that's tough because you're constantly wiping sweat, your hair goes, nyeh, and the makeup artist can't keep up. So I think I might, this is totally contrary to what I've said so often, but I might pick Buffalo Week 18.
You can always put clothes on. You can only take so many clothes off.
Correct.
Especially on TV. So you've been on the front lines for sort of the cultural change that this country's gone through over the last couple of decades. What do you think we've lost? What do you think we're doing a good job holding on to? And what are you trying to preserve? Culturally, are we closer to the Kansas City Chiefs or closer to the Cleveland Browns?
Oh, that's an interesting spectrum you bring up. So what you're saying is, are we closer to winning or closer to losing? Is that what you're getting at?
On a 1 to 10 scale, I'd put the Chiefs at a 10 and the Browns at a 1, and my Bucks at an 8.
Okay. And you conveniently left out the defending Super Bowl champ Philly Eagles, which is interesting.
We beat them last year.
Well, okay. I think we're somewhere in the middle and hopefully trending toward the Chiefs. Listen, for as much as people hate this current administration, I happen to think they really are viewing America through a lens of, let's make it great for everyone, and except for illegal aliens. So if you want to die on the hill of defending, an illegal migrant who is here who may have damaged someone or something, if that's where you want to, go and stand, that's your prerogative, because we're in America, thank God. But, I think the economy getting reset here is something that is so necessary. I think we've talked for ages, at least I have, about I try extremely hard in every way that I can to avoid anything made in China, because it is a communist, hostile nation that still has slavery. And if we really believe that slavery is such an evil, why is it okay in China or anywhere else for that matter? I think that there are a lot of things that still have us really on the brink. I think one of my favorite people is Gates Garcia, the Canadian professor, who says we are practicing suicidal empathy. We're so empathetic that these very people we pretend to be helping are going to end up being the demise of us. And so I think the wide open border was an atrocious time in our history. It's not that I don't want to welcome people here. Like I said, my dad's parents immigrated here. So many of our ancestors did, right? But they did it by the process. And they didn't pay a coyote or get raped by a coyote on the way. And to encourage that and to say, we're going to pay for you to live here, basically. Your taxpayer, the U.S. citizen taxpayer is going to pay for all of this, which people, I think, weren't totally aware that was going on, and make it such a magnet, and that these people are willing to endure hell to get here. I just think there has to be a better way. So I think that the things that people think Trump is so evil about are actually things that are helping Americans. And I think that Americans have been forgotten in some ways, that they've been left behind so that we can, help Ukraine fight a war, so that we can let in all these migrants that, and then people are going, wait a minute, I'm looking at what I paid in taxes last year. Wow, that's a lot. I wonder where that's going. And now you've got Doge publicizing where a lot of that's gone. And I don't care if it's less than $2 trillion. I want to get rid of all waste. I want to streamline the government. I want to bring it up into the modern times. No files in caves. We don't need that. So I think there's a lot of good that's going on, and I'm really hoping in these next 100 days that the product of all of that is more visible to everyone, so that they can understand that their lives can be better.
Yeah, Doge has been so criticized by the left because the number isn't as grand as they expect it to be. It's not about the number. It's about the principle of the exposure and the transparency of the government waste and fraud that they're revealing. I don't care, like you said, if it's $1 or $2 trillion. It's the fact that these things exist. And if this much exists, the pie is 90% bigger than that, or whatever the number is. So you've obviously done a good job of raising your children if you have a 16-year-old that doesn't use curse words. My kids are 10, 7, and 4, and my 4-year-old probably has the worst mouth of all my kids. We talk about preserving this country and promoting values. I mean, the average Gen Z isn't watching Fox News. So, but we've also at the same time, we're starting to see a revival, certainly from a religious standpoint, of young people attending their religious services more often. But how do you think, Michele, that our generation, you and I, do a good job of promoting these values, specifically in the media, to the generation that comes next, so we can preserve what we're fighting for today?
I think be exemplary. I think leading by example is hugely important. Um, and putting your best argument forward and having a real clarity about the way that you deliver it. I think people like Tyrus on Fox, I think he's insanely valuable because he's speaking a language, speaking to people who don't necessarily, he just has a unique way of speaking to people. Kat Timpf has a unique way of speaking to people. So I think what's been brilliant about Fox's approach is that they have brought in a lot of younger voices to speak to younger people. And I think that's on both sides of the aisle. Jessica Tarloff is really young. She's a Democrat. She's very much on the left, but let her talk. And I admire her for sitting there on the five and dealing with four voices that disagree with her. I think comedy too. I think a reason Greg Gutfeld is so successful is, yeah, he now and then has a big time celebrity on, but he basically brings in kind of those of us who are a little more average. We're not George Clooney, we're not Jennifer Aniston. We're just people who have lived life and worked really hard all our lives, and we just talk. And it's not to promote movies or to promote albums. It's just to talk, but it's done in a way where you can laugh at yourselves and laugh at others and laugh at the ridiculousness of all this. And I saw long ago, even when he was doing Red Eye long ago, I could see that this guy had something and it was going to develop. And sure enough, here he is. And so I think that being able to laugh more, but by exposing some of the absurdity out there, is going to help. I do think this ship is tough to turn around, but I think it's starting to turn.
Yeah, if the MAGA movement or Trump has done anything, he's swapped out politics for personal. He's made so much more of what we're dealing with personal. He's actually demonstrated how it's affecting people's lives, and he's doing that like Gutfeld, like comedy, like youth, through storytelling. And I think a younger generation relates better to storytelling. I think it's a very relatable way to draw people in. And I think we're starting to do that in the new media better than we've done in sort of the old mainstream media. Just a couple more questions for you, Michele.
Yeah.
So, record holder for sports Emmys.
For my category, for sideline reporting.
Let me brag on you, Michele.
Oh, gosh.
A minute ago, you were comparing yourself to George Clooney.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, I was saying I was anything but George Clooney.
I know. I'm kidding. So 100 years from now, when people look back on Michele Tafoya, what do they say? What dent did you put in the universe?
Well, I hope they're talking about my kids. And that, that I raised good kids who in turn raised good kids who left this earth better than they found it. That old saying. I know it's cliche, but honestly, I don't think it's going to be about the Emmys or, Sunday Night Football. Certainly, I'm damn proud and feel so blessed to have been part of that group. There's just nothing like it. Nothing like it. And I smile because I have so many great memories of bus rides and post-game dinners and pre-game dinners and all the rest. And some really awful moments of humility for me, but some really great moments. It was the best. But that doesn't define me. And I hope, and something I'm really working on, is to just be someone that friends can talk to, that will listen, that maybe lent support in a time of trouble, that was an example for my kids in one way or another, and a good example, and, just built that legacy. I think honestly, that's the most important thing one can do.
I love that. We talk a lot on this show about meaningful relationships. You can't go through life alone. And the more meaningful relationship you have, not the more relationships, the more meaningful relationships
Quality
you have.
over quantity, baby.
That's exactly right. It's a way to almost compound your impact on the world by having an effect on people on a personal level.
Yeah.
So last question, I want you to promote the show, tell us where we can find you and all that sort of stuff. But what is next for you? I did a little Googling, and a Minnesota Senate race has come up in conversation. I'd vote for you.
Yeah.
Are we gonna see you in a voting booth at some point?
Voting for others. Listen, I'm having fun building this podcast. Please find us, the Michele Tafoya podcast, wherever you download, and hit the subscribe button just as you do for Gates, because it's great to have a subscriber base, and it's free, and you never miss an episode. I'm continuing to write more. Writing is tedious for me, but it's cathartic, and I think I have a lot of experiences of my life that I hope can again encourage other people. I want to leave a legacy of courage behind. I think we don't have enough courage. I think we've babied our kids. I think we've coddled them. There's the dog, he agrees. I think that we've said, we want to protect you and keep you safe. We do want to keep our children safe. But it's that protection from any adversity that is so negatively impacting this country. So I want people to be brave and do good. I want people to find their courage, find their strength. I don't care who you are. Courage is sort of built in. And even if you don't necessarily feel it right away in your DNA, you can cultivate it. You can. You can stand up to anybody. I'm not talking about violence or fighting. I'm talking about having the courage of your principles to find your values, stick to your values. And it's okay to be a really good person. It might not seem cool, but it's really damn cool in the final analysis to be a good person. We all know what good is. We all know what courage feels like, and if we don't, I just am begging people to practice it. If I could implement something in public schools, I would say we've got to have kids financially literate by the time they graduate. In other words, be able to balance their bank account. And we should have seniors take at least a semester of phys ed in self-defense. Put in self-defense. I think that would make kids, and I can just hear it, parents go, oh no, that's too scary for kids. They don't need to know that someone might attack them. But here's the reality. Someone might attack them. So if you're going to do school shooter drills, you might as well do individual drills where people at least learn some tactics of what to do to protect themselves. This instills courage, boldness, strength of spine, all that stuff. That's the stuff we should be teaching kids, not how they are victims, not how they are, unsafe, but make them feel confident and courageous. Things are still going to be scary, but you go into them anyway because you've got the courage to do so. You can come out on the other side. That one is really important to me. And that's something I'm really trying to instill in my kids. And I started at a young age, and just let them know that they are brave enough and bold enough. And things might not always turn out the way they want, and life isn't always fair, but you can withstand adversity. And if you don't have adversity in your life, you're going to live a really boring life.
Courage is contagious.
Yeah.
Courage is cool. You're courageous. You're cool. You're brave. You're bold. Michele, you're everything this show represents. And I just want to say thank you as a lifelong fan for coming on the show.
Tells you how old I am.
No.
If he's a lifelong fan.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure, Gates. Good luck with the show.
Thank you.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because it sure is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse.